Crystal Tower Information Whiskey 2153 Zulu, wind 060 at 5.
076 Mike Juliet, this is departure radar contact.
Hazardous weather information from Minnesota available on flight service frequency.
You've dialed in the Flying Midwest podcast, connecting aviators from across America's heartland, sharing news, information, and events from around the region.
Calling Nancy 53 on Oak Tower, roger, turn left heading 070, runway 9er, clear for takeoff.
Sit back, relax, and join our crew for some hangar talk as we discuss a wide variety of regional aviation topics.
Departure 71143, flying flag, runway 28 left, quick takeoff, left hand southbound first.
And now, from our home at the Anoka County Blaine Airport, our checklist is complete, and we're ready for departure for another episode of the Flying Midwest podcast.
Contact departure on your flight.
Welcome, everyone, to the Flying Midwest podcast. I am Jim, one of your hosts. Welcome back to the program, the one and only Badger.
Hello.
And, as always, Maddie.
Hey.
I don't know. You threw me off guard because you always introduced Maddie first, so I wasn't ready for it.
I wasn't really sure what I was going to say that.
The little, spinning wheel, loading on your face.
This is in the wrong order. What do I do? Just say hello. Andrew, it's good to have you back. You weren't around last week because you had, a real job or something like that. So, it's good to have you back, my friend.
It's good to be back, and it'll be short-lived because as we get into this interview, I wasn't there for that either.
That's right. You weren't in this
I'll
interview.
have to be the one that asks what's coming up because I don't actually know.
Hey, that's a really good segue. Maddie, what's coming up on this episode?
Great question, Jim.
It was Andrew's, so...
On this episode of the Flying Midwest podcast, we're talking about the Air Race Classic, which is a transcontinental women's air race that happens every year. We'll have on Emmy, who is part of the Air Race Classic team, and Cheryl, who was a first-time attendee last year. We're excited to talk about how the race works, the history of the race, and a little bit about their experiences.
And one of the important parts about having them on now is registration closes April 1st. So if you like this episode, you think this is something cool you want to try out, we'll have information in our show notes about how to register for that event.
Are you excited, Badger?
Yeah, I'm excited for it. So let's jump right into the sectional showdown, blast through the news and events, and get right to it.
Love it. I'm really excited to have you back for the sectional showdown, actually. We didn't bring up a new one last week because I thought it wouldn't be appropriate for us to do a sectional showdown without you. So welcome back for the intro portion, at least, and let's do a fun and exciting sectional showdown.
I can't wait.
Good, because I happen to have one for you. Welcome back to the Pilot Quarters Sectional Showdown, brought to you by our friends at Pilot Quarters. Let's talk about fun sectional symbology. All right, so I just sent it to both of you. It's going to be up on our Facebook page for all of our listeners here. But it essentially is like a magenta-looking spaceship.
Yeah, so, my family is a NASA and space family, so I'd be really disappointed if I got something with the rocket wrong. And I want to say there's rocket launch activity in the area, but that almost seems too obvious for historically what we've done with the showdown. So I'm going to go with that because that just makes sense to me, and that's what I remember it being, but I feel like that's too obvious.
I know. I don't want to say it because I know what it is, and so I don't want to be boring.
Okay, well, since you know what it is, if you want to make up your most entertaining answer, we'll accept that too.
Oh, no. You remember that movie, The Incredibles?
I've heard of it, yeah.
Yeah, you remember that rocket with the big robot in it? Yeah, they built those there.
They built those there, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, the one at the end?
Yeah.
I'll take that. Yeah.
So coming up with my own creative thing, I think this is going to be a new port or station or stopping point for these new air taxi drones that they're coming out with.
Are they going to fly those to space?
Well, no, maybe they could. Why not? They're doing everything with drones.
Okay. I'm more excited to see the creative answers that our listeners come up with. I'm sure some people will know what this is, but half the fun of this for me is just seeing the fun and excitement that comes out of the answers. Okay. Thanks for playing along, you two, with the Pilot Quarters Sectional Showdown. We will have the actual image up on our Facebook page when we publish the episode, so you can leave your comments as well. So, now that we've gotten that fun and excitement out of the way, should we jump into our news and events?
Oh, yeah. All right, today we're going to start with Minnesota. 3 people were flying a hot air balloon trying to land in a field. Unfortunately, they got caught by a gust and hit power lines. Now, generally, this is obviously not a very good thing. This is in Rochester. It did start a brush fire, but they were able to put it out. The people in the basket hit the power lines, fell 20 to 30 feet. 2 reported minor injuries. The other one was fine. And they found the balloon. It was drifting southeast without its basket a couple of miles away. So they were able to retrieve that. So that was interesting. And yeah, there's a video. We'll put it in the show notes if you're curious.
Moving down to Missouri, where the 139th Airlift Wing executed a sortie that lasted over 40 hours. The point of the mission wasn't necessarily to test the endurance of the crews, but rather the endurance of the C-130 Hercules. So in the middle of February, the first of multiple crews took off for about a 10-hour leg, and then landed about 10 hours later and changed out crews, but kept the engines running. The next crew took off, flew about 10 hours or so, and this went on for 41 and a half hours. And the engines of the Hercules were running for over 45 hours. The whole point of this was to test the endurance of the engines of the Hercules to see how they would handle running for so long without being shut down, as well as the ability to rapidly deploy and get into a theater scenario with minimal time. Each crew was accompanied by 2 maintenance airmen, a crew chief, and an avionics specialist. Pretty cool stuff happening out of the 139th Airlift Wing.
So scooching on over to Kansas, we have a couple here. Textron Aviation is building what's called Flight Adventure, which is set to take off in 2025. Whoever wrote that title, good job. I appreciate your pun. Great job. Here in Wichita, there is a museum called the Exploration Place where kids and families can go and learn about all kinds of stuff. Next fall, 2025, Textron is helping bring a new facet. It will be an outdoor adventure place for kids to learn about aviation. Mainly, they wanted to focus on the diverse careers that you can find in aviation and just inspiring awe in aviation itself. They will have a sculpture of a beach stagger wing, which is pretty cool. They'll have an interactive Cessna Citation that kids can go in and like play around in and look at. And it looks like they'll have maybe some air traffic control towers as well. It looks like it'll be a pretty big part of the museum itself. And they're hoping that this addition will bring more visitors.
Staying in Kansas, let's talk about KDOT. And no, that's not an identifier for an airport. Such an airport does not exist. We're talking about the Kansas Department of Transportation and specifically their aviation division, who's looking to improve their air ambulance access throughout the state. It's part of the Kansas Airport Improvement Program, and they've been in contact with what they refer to as a state ambulance association, but it's partnering with them to find out what their needs are as far as airport requirements. They broke it up over the course of 2 different lists, things that air ambulances need and things that they want. So things like minimum runway lengths, AWOS or Automated Weather Observation System Service. It's the radio voice that broadcasts the weather automatically. Those are needs as well as things like runway lighting. And then listed in the wants are things like even longer runways, parallel taxiways or turnaround points at the end of runways, facilities for pilots to be able to use the restroom and check the weather, things along those lines. So it sounds like Kansas DOT is working well to obviously serve the needs of its communities, because I think can all agree that air ambulances are an important part of public service.
Absolutely. Here in Kansas, we have a lot of really small airfields in a lot of really remote communities. So I think it's really great that they're being heard out. Hopefully they'll be able to make some of these work.
And I know locally a lot of people, at least in my area, think of air ambulances as helicopters. And so the public might not realize air ambulance could mean airplanes as well. So having these runway length requirements be met and other things as well would be really important.
All right, we're going to stay in Kansas. We're going to get a little controversial. So
we're never controversial on this show.
You guys know of a company called Boeing, right?
I believe I've heard of them, yeah.
Yeah, okay, great.
Do now?
Boeing is actually in discussions right now to, I want to say, reacquire Spirit Aerosystems. So Spirit is located here in Wichita. So Spirit Aerosystems broke off from Boeing in 2005 and became their own independent company. That clearly has not worked out super well. Unfortunately, there are a couple things that happened. Not only is Boeing contracting out a lot of their building and manufacturing, Spirit also had trouble during the pandemic because they didn't have that. They didn't have the benefits of being with a company like Boeing who could financially survive during the pandemics. Both declined to comment. No shock there. We will see what happens here, but Boeing has sold off a lot of assets in the last years, and now they're seeing the repercussions from it. So we'll see if they actually get back together, and yeah, it'll be really interesting.
Closing out the news, we go to Ohio, where we will be talking about drones, probably that will land at certain marked spots with rocket ship-looking things on sectional charts. But the Ohio Department of Transportation, so the ODOT, is testing out an unmanned drone program for monitoring traffic. It looks like they've been testing for about 4 miles of U.S. Highway 33 to monitor traffic and traffic flow and incident management. And it sounds like it's similar to cameras, like putting cameras on poles or interstates to be able to monitor what the traffic is doing. The drone itself is a 20-pound Census Centero aircraft. If you see the picture, we'll put a link in the show notes. It almost looks like a little V-tail Bonanza, but instead of one propeller in the front, it's got the typical 4 propellers on the top that our listeners would be accustomed to seeing on a drone. As of right now, the Ohio Department of Transportation has over 1,000 stationary cameras for traffic monitoring, but they're exploring the use of drones to provide visual coverage without the cameras in the event of a roadway emergency, to be able to move the cameras in different areas, because obviously stationary cameras can't really move other than pivoting a little bit. And they're saying this is only the beginning of traffic management and drones.
That's an interesting way to do it.
Yeah, I think we're seeing a lot of things where drones are potentially taking over other jobs, so to speak. You know, I think of like aerial photography type of things. You see drones doing that. Search and rescue type of things with law enforcement and EMS. You see drones doing that. And it looks like this is just another one for the drone, can I call them pilots, operators? Maddie, do you have any take? Are they pilots?
Tread carefully here.
Where drones are potentially a more efficient and more portable option.
All right. Well, since we talked about some news, should we jump into our events part?
Oh, yeah.
So to transition this, I'm going to cover a bit of news and some events all at the same time. For those of you who have not seen, the United States Air Force announced that the A-10 demo team will be entering its final season of performances this year. So with that, I'm going to cover some of the events that will feature the A-10 demo team throughout the Midwest this season. So April 13th, they will be at Lafayette, Indiana. On June 1st and 2nd, you can find them at Terre Haute, Indiana. Then they make a number of stops in Michigan, starting June 29th and 30th at Traverse City, July 3rd through the 7th at Battle Creek, and Muskegon, August 9th through the 11th. They will then be in Cleveland, Ohio, August 31st through September 2nd, and they will round out their Midwest stops at Robinson, Illinois, September 28th through the 29th. And as long as we're talking about military demonstration teams, let's talk about 2 of the biggest, the United States Air Force Thunderbirds and the U.S. Navy Blue Angels. So let's cover both of their schedules throughout the Midwest this season, starting first with the Thunderbirds. You can catch them first at the Duluth Air Show, May 18th through the 19th. And for those of you that are wondering, May 18th and 19th, that's not right for Duluth. There is a change to that show this year. It will be in May and not the typical summer months that you are accustomed to. Next up, they will do a flyover the Indianapolis 500 on May 26th. They'll have 2 stops in June, one June 8th and 9th at Selfridge's Open House and Air Show at Selfridge Air National Guard Base in Michigan. And the next stop, June 14th and 16th, the Columbus Air Show in Columbus, Ohio. For the month of July, we can find them at Battle Creek, Michigan at the Field of Flight Air Show and Balloon Festival. That's June 4th, 6th, and 7th. Next up, Wings Over Whiteman Air Show at Whiteman Air Force Base, Missouri, July 13th and 14th. And then the Milwaukee Air and Water Show, July 27th and 28th. They have 1 show in August at Offutt Air Force Base at Defenders of Freedom Air and Space Show, August 24th and 25th. 1 stop in September at the Speed of Sound Air Show in St. Joseph, Missouri, September 14th and 15th. And rounding out their Midwest season, October 12th through the 14th, Thunder over the Heartland Air Show in Topeka, Kansas. Into the Blue Angels schedule for this season, all of their shows during the month of June will be in the Midwest, starting June 1st and 2nd at Terre Haute, Indiana, at the Terre Haute Air Show, June 8th and 9th at the Spirit of St. Louis Air Show in Chesterfield, Missouri, June 15th and 16th at the Deke Slayton Air Fest in La Crosse, Wisconsin, June 22nd and 23rd at the Centerpoint Energy Dayton Air Show in Dayton, Ohio, and June 29th and 30th, the National Cherry Festival Air Show in Traverse City, Michigan. The month of July, you can find them in Fargo, North Dakota at the Fargo Air Show, July 27th and 28th. They make 2 stops in the Midwest in August 10th and the 11th, the Chicago Air and Water Show, and August 24th and 25th at Frontiers in Flight Air Show in Wichita, Kansas. And then August 31st through September 2nd, they will be at the Cleveland National Air Show in Cleveland, Ohio, to round out their 2024 season. So some events a little bit closer to now. We've got the Purdue Aviation Days. That event will take place April 15th at West Lafayette, Indiana. That event is going to feature a number of seminars and panels, including young professionals in aviation, diversity, equity, and inclusion in aviation, as well as the A-10 demonstration team that we just talked about, and some other aerial demonstrations. Information for that event is at PurdueAviationDay.com. On April 6th, you can check out the University of North Dakota Aerospace Community Day. There'll be events both on campus and at their flight operations in Grand Forks International Airport. You can explore a number of static displays, including their aircraft and helicopters from the UND fleet. And you can chat with their flying team, their Air Race Classic team, which is fitting because we're talking about the Air Race Classic in this episode, and the UND chapter of Women in Aviation. More information on that event will be in our show notes. Tickets have gone on sale now for the May 25th and 26th Let Freedom Fly International Air Show in Pierre, South Dakota. They'll have a number of performers, static displays, and flyovers to include performers such as Philip Steinbeck, Bill Stein, Matt Yonkin, Vicky Benzing, a warbird flyover, and static displays of United States Air Force and Army aircraft. And hey, we talked about this event a couple minutes ago, but the Duluth Air and Aviation Expo is returning this year in May. You can see demonstrations from the United States Air Force Thunderbirds, the United States Navy Rhino F-18 demo team. They'll also have a flyby from a Marine Corps Osprey, a Marine Corps F-35B, and they'll have a number of other performers and static displays for you to check out. More information on that event, DuluthAirShow.com.
We have had a significant amount of news and events this time around.
We have, and I think that's a good stopping point. We'll talk more about some. We'll have more news and events on our next episode, so be sure to check that out. Attention aviators. If you're passionate about flying, you need to check out Pilot Quarters. They are a pilot-owned family business based right in the Midwest in Michigan. They are on a mission to create your next favorite flying shirt. From comfy camp shirts to stylish polo shirts, sundresses, and tees, Pilot Quarters crafts unique aviation apparel. Choose from full-color chart designs, subtle overlays, or even wild tropical pattern blends with your favorite charts. Elevate your style and aviation passion. Visit pilotquarters.com today and soar in style. Aviation friends, let me share with you an absolute game changer in eyewear. I am personally hooked on Flying Eyes optics. Their stylish designs pair seamlessly with your headset for superior comfort. I used to fly with those cheap gas station sunglasses, but since switching to Flying Eyes, I can't go back. They're sleek, durable, and way more comfortable. Trust me, your eyes deserve the upgrade. Check out our affiliate link in the show notes, and make sure you use code FlyingMidwest10 for an unbeatable 10% off your purchase at Flying Eyes. Fly with comfort, fly with style. Visit Flying Eyes Optics today. Let's talk about some of the best active noise reduction headsets on the market. Whether you're a seasoned pro or just taking flight lessons, Lightspeed Aviation headsets are engineered with you in mind every step of the way. They've created the quietest and most durable A&R headsets on the market. Their high quality and innovative technology ensures you stay comfortable, connected, and safe in the cockpit. I've personally flown with Lightspeed for over a decade, and I wouldn't dream of flying with any other headset. Elevate your flying experience with Lightspeed. Check out our affiliate link in the show notes so that you can support the podcast with your next purchase. Aviators gear up for the skies with Flying Midwest Podcast merch. Dive into our latest edition, the striking Ghost graphic designs, available in long-sleeve tees, sweatshirts, and hoodies, perfect for your winter flying adventures. Head over to flyingmidwest.com/merch today and snag some of the coolest gear in aviation.
You guys have been making me wait way too long to hear this interview, and since I didn't get to be a part of it, I can't wait any longer. So should we jump right into the interview?
I think we should.
All right, let's do it.
Well, Emmy and Cheryl, welcome to the Flying Midwest podcast. Thank you so much for joining us, and we're going to talk about the Air Race Classic tonight.
Awesome. Really looking forward to it.
Sounds good.
To start us off, every episode we do kind of our icebreaker Fast Five questions. Cheryl, you've been on the podcast before. I don't remember if we did this when you were on or not, but you get to run through it anyways.
We did not.
Well, I have a very specific set of questions for you, but the real questions, either one of you can, both of you can answer kind of in turn. But Cheryl, your questions consists of who is your favorite student, name your favorite airplane partner, and who's your favorite person to own a hangar with. So those are your Fast Five questions. I knocked out of 3 because they're very difficult questions.
Okay, well, let's see. That would have to be, I suppose, Jim,
Me?
and Jim.
Great answer. Good answer. Good answer.
Sounds
Good
like
answer. There's. All right. On to the real questions now. Question number 1, and Emmy, I'll have you answer first, and then Cheryl, just for the sake of both of us, or both of you not staring at each other, waiting for who's going to answer first out of politeness. Favorite aircraft that you have flown?
Favorite aircraft that I've flown is the B-25 Mitchell.
Oh, that's cool.
Ooh.
Okay, well, I don't think anybody can really top that.
I should have let you go first, Cheryl.
Sorry, Cheryl. I'm sure you've flown a lot of cool things, but...
Sorry, I'm not kidding. Because now you've been left. My favorite airplane that I've flown is a 152.
Is it a specific 152?
Fun.
No, when I was learning to fly and when I first started instructing, we had like a whole fleet of them. So my favorite one was 757 Sierra X-Ray. She was sweet.
I love that.
It's not as cool as a V-25. I'm sorry.
No, but it means it's a much...
laugh at that.
It means that... No, nobody's going to laugh. I think that means so much to you, and that's what's more important than how cool the airplane is. It's like, that means more to you than anything, and I think that's what's cooler.
I totally agree with you, Emmy. Good answer, both of you. Favorite aviation movie? Cheryl, I'll have you start.
Top Gun Maverick.
I can get behind that.
Yep.
And you think that one's better than the original?
I've seen it probably... Well,
Do you say 12?
Yes. That's conservative. I just watched it the other night.
I am a fan. That's a good movie. All right, Emmy, what do you got?
I'm torn, but the first thing that comes to mind is, I think the movie's called The Final Countdown. It's an old movie. F-14's gone back in time to fight during World War II, and I remember sitting on the couch with my dad watching it, and then it just sits, it's like a core memory.
Yeah.
That sounds really...
We had another guest quite a while ago mention that as like his favorite aviation movie. I'm like, all right, I got to check that out. It's legit. It checks out. It was a pretty good movie. Question number 3. Ugliest airplane you've ever seen?
I can't remember the manufacturer, but I think it's like a Eastern European built. It's called a Belphegor. It's one of those things that just sits in my mind rent-free.
Yeah, that is an ugly airplane. It looks like a Chinook body with like 2 wings on it. I don't know what's happening here.
It looks like a high school or like a middle school science project that just went severely wrong that was government funded. That's what it looks like to me.
Let's do it.
Oh my god! Oh, it's awful! I love it!
So, what do you got, Cheryl? Ugliest airplane?
All right, I'm going to look one up on the internet, but I got an ugly airplane. It's a funny story if you want to hear that.
We'll accept that.
If you don't want to hear it, that's okay too.
That's
No,
okay. I'm
hearing
going
it.
to tell you anyways kind of vibe, or... I'm just kidding.
Yeah, right, exactly. There was a Zenith that was taking off, and they were fairly new at the time, and taking off just before me at my airport, and the tower controller cleared him to take off, and then he went off, and after he thought that the airplane was gone off the frequency, he said to me, "That has to be the ugliest airplane in the world." But the pilot was still on, and he came back on and said, I don't even remember what he said, but obviously the controller was very embarrassed. So.
Oh my
Nothing like that for you.
That is a totally acceptable answer for the purpose of this.
That is awesome.
Okay.
Question number 4. Besides Air Race Classic, what is your favorite aviation event throughout the year?
Oshkosh. Oh, Oshkosh.
What about Oshkosh?
The air shows, the warbirds,
It's Oshkosh.
hanging out with friends. It's Oshkosh.
Yep.
Everything's cool about it.
Yeah. What do you have, Emmy?
Oshkosh, for the same reasons. It's a family reunion every year where I get to see all my people. We live all over, but we're all in the same place. So yeah, 100% agree.
And the final question, if you could meet anyone in aviation, dead or alive, and have a conversation with them, who would it be? And Emmy, you're up first this time.
I don't know if this counts as aviation, but I guess it's more space. But Katherine Johnson. I would go back in a heartbeat, and I would love to meet her and just talk to her about life. I just finished reading Hidden Figures about a week ago.
Okay.
So that's really been on my mind recently is her career path and how she managed to do everything she wanted to do, and she made every sacrifice of every kind and how she made it happen. So I would just love just to pick her brain.
Yeah, absolutely.
Love it.
What do you got, Cheryl?
Any of the Apollo astronauts or Gene Kranz.
Gene Kranz.
I would love to hear that one.
Yeah. I love that.
I would love to hear their stories.
I'd love to hear how his wife designed the vests for every launch. That would be my first question to Gene.
Yes.
I want to know about the vests.
Yes.
Well, thank you both for playing along with our Fast 5 questions. Wonderful answers, very entertaining. Let's get into the meat and potatoes of this episode then and jump into the interview. I think we'll start with you first, Emmy, but can you give us a brief overview of your aviation background?
So I guess my elevator speech for aviation, I learned to fly when I was in high school. I went to college and got an engineering and aviation degree. I worked as an aviation systems engineer for a few years before I flew professionally. I'm a CFI and a II, former air ambulance pilot, former charter pilot, former assistant chief pilot for a Part 135 operator, and now I'm a 777 first officer flying international cargo.
You've been busy.
Look at you. Holy cow. You're living my dream. That's awesome. Way to go.
I've had a lot of fun, and luckily I have a lot more fun to still be had. So.
Oh, for sure. And you have a formal role with Air Race Classic, right?
Yes, I am the director of education for the Air Race Classic.
Well, this is a perfect place for you to educate us then about the Air Race Classic.
I'll try my best, yeah.
All right, Cheryl, how about you?
I am a retired first grade teacher, and I got my license very late in life. So I was like 37 when I got my license. I got interested in it because a colleague of mine sent me to a aerospace activities class for elementary teachers. So we got to take a ride in a 152. We got to make tissue paper, hot air balloons, rockets, all that kind of stuff. And then we also got to fly in a C-130 down to Houston to tour the Johnson Space Center. And after our little demo flight in the 152, I went home and looked up flight schools and decided to learn to fly. And so that's where I got my license. I worked at a flight school, working the desk, like scheduling airplanes and talking to students and that kind of stuff. And then the instructors said, you already teach, why don't you go ahead and get your instructor rating? And so I worked my way up, got all the necessary things, instrument commercial, and then flight instructor. And I've been instructing for 23 and a half years. And now that I'm retired, that's what I do full time.
That's amazing.
That is so impressive. I love that. Cheryl was already cool from the air race, but she's cooler now.
Well, I love what you've done in your story. That's pretty cool.
It is. You both have unique and interesting stories. So,
Ladies, not to beat around the bush, but what is the Air Race Classic? Could you tell us a little bit about it?
Air racing as a sport, if you will, was very, very popular in the 1920s and the 1930s. You could equate it to almost like the NFL and like the Super Bowl of today. I mean, tens of thousands of people would come and watch these pilots race these courses and do these flybys and all that. But one thing that was pretty typical of the 1920s was women weren't really involved, weren't really allowed to participate. So one thing that stemmed from all of this was the women pilots got together, and there weren't that many, remember, back in the 1920s. And they got together like, well, let's do our own thing. So they managed to put together a whole group of ladies. There were 20 racers in the very first women's air derby, which was held in 1929 from Santa Monica, California to Cleveland, Ohio. And through a variety of, changes over the years, whether we've become incorporated, we've adjusted for aircraft advancement, but the camaraderie and the sisterhood that started in the Women's Air Derby in 1929 still exists today through the Air Race Classic. So that's kind of the short and sweet of it, that we are continuing the legacy of women's air racing that has started almost 100 years ago.
Wow. So today's version of the Air Race Classic. So how does the race itself work as far as going through different checkpoints and flying the course, things like that?
So the course is determined usually kind of at the end of the race. We already know what next year's course is going to be like. So there's a board that decides what the course is going to be like. It's usually between 2,400 and 2,600 miles with about 8 or 9 stops. Last year's course went from Grand Forks, North Dakota, all the way down to Miami, Florida. It was 23 degrees of latitude change. Typically, it's not a straight line. It goes zigzaggy, and it will crisscross sometimes. We stop for fuel. We maybe stop overnight, depending on what the weather is and how far we can make it in a day. The race itself is VFR only, so you can't file IFR. You have to start at, is it 6:30, Emmy, in the morning?
It depends.
It's departure time is.
It's usually right about ARC sunrise is about 6:30.
Yeah, and then everybody has to be on the ground by sunset. You can't fly after sunset. You have to be on the ground by then.
The board of directors spends years planning the routes as they come to fruition. So usually how airports get involved in becoming a part of the route is they either show interest by contacting and working with the air race ahead of time. We get a lot of interest actually when we're at Oshkosh. A lot of airport managers or people will come and be like, how can we be involved with this? So we just kind of keep a tally. We also try to spread the love, if you will. So Air Race Classic, try to change the route so that we're covering as much of the U.S. as we can over time, so that we're not just hugging the East Coast. We're not just hugging the West Coast, not only for airports to be able to be involved, but also for more and more racers to be involved. It's really interesting to, on the behind the scenes side, witness how much thought and detail goes into planning these routes. It's not just willy-nilly. There's a lot of conversations and a lot of considerations that are made.
Well, I suppose to that point, if you're changing the route like that to, give more people exposure, give more airports exposure, things like that, this could be a unique experience for each participant every single year, flying to different airports and things like that.
100%. And I'm sure Cheryl can attest to this as well. Her and I flew the same race route last year, and we both had completely different experiences. Not that one's good or bad compared to the other, but we just had different experiences as a result. And that's kind of why I keep coming back to it, is because, okay, so I've flown however many races, but every time I do it, I learn something new. It's a completely different experience than the last time I did it. So it's not like it's, pause and repeat. It's a whole new experience.
So you mentioned having really super different experiences. Can you kind of elaborate on what those experiences were like, what the differences one could maybe expect, or how does that work? Because, it seems like it's a race to the finish, so everybody's, in the same area, seeing the same things, but clearly that's not the case.
I guess the two biggest things that are kind of the most obvious differences that you'll see between teams, as an example, is who's flying in the airplane. So how the teamwork, how the crew resources management, the CRM works within each team, but also the types of airplanes that are being flown. So Cheryl, last year flew a Cardinal, correct? Right, Cheryl?
Yep. Uh-huh.
Yep. And then I was in a 182. So we had different performing airplanes as a result of that too. So not only is it just how did my team get, how do we work together? What was our team strategy? And, Cheryl's got her team and her team strategy and her airplane's performance. So those two things just alone are already providing some level of, dynamics between,
each of our experiences, let alone the actual strategy of how we flew, how we took advantage of the weather and things like that.
For me, one of the big things was it's a totally different style of flying than I'm used to doing. I mean, I am instructing every day, so I safely go to the practice area and do my little maneuvers and everything with my instructor, with my students. And then this is like full throttle the whole way. I never fly an airplane full throttle for, this was the whole route. And so my partner, the first time I tried to bring the throttle back, she says, "Oh, no, it's full throttle, it's full throttle." And so getting used to that, and then getting used to flying low rather than, up at 3,000 or 3,500 or whatever, because you want to take advantage of tailwinds if there are any, or the least amount of headwind. And so you look at the winds aloft, and if you decide to climb, it better be worth it. For example, last year, nobody had tailwinds the whole race. It was headwinds every day. And so it was a matter of, well, where's the least amount of headwind, and do I climb up or do I stay down low? And so I was kind of prepared to fly the whole race like 1,000 AGL, full throttle. And honestly, it kind of scared me to death. And so that was my feeling going into it. And after I did it, it was like, oh, that was pretty fun. And I mean, with enough planning ahead of time, knowing where the obstacles are and stuff. So, yeah. But that was my experience. And I came away with a very positive feeling about it.
So that brings me to a question that I had. So, Emmy, how many years have you flown the Air Race Classic?
So my first race was in 2015. I've raced four full races, and then I also participated in the Air Derby that we hosted in 2021, which was the COVID replacement, if you will. We actually still continue to do the Air Derby now, but it's just a one-day version of the full race. So I've done 4 full races, 5 total ARC events, if you will.
So I'm curious, from the perspective of Cheryl being a first-time flyer and you who's been a part of this organization now for a number of years, what between the two of you are those biggest differences from jumping into this for the first time to having a little bit more experience? Or is there much of a difference? Because as we talked about, this route changes yearly.
Every year that you go into a race, you kind of know, well, after you've done it a couple of times, you kind of know that you have a general understanding of like, okay, I know how to do this race. I know how to fly my airplane, optimize, the performance of it. I think it's not so much the number of years per se that's maybe given me a more positive impact on how I'm able to race. I think it's actually just my overall flying experience in general that has a greater influence on that, because my knowledge base has grown exponentially since my first race in 2015. So I just have a stronger understanding just of the fundamentals of flying, not even necessarily air racing. Just that growth that I've had over the last almost 10 years is just because I've just been flying. So I attribute more of my experience in air racing just to my overall growth of experience in flying in general. I think there are things you do pick up as you race more and more, because you do get used to things like Cheryl described. There's the balance of you're trying to optimize, the wins that you've got, but how do you do that while you're also trying to meet the rules? And there's a balancing act that you're learning. And I think maybe that's the thing you learn to do a little bit better, maybe a little bit faster than your first year when you do it. But then once you do it, it just kind of clicks and it kind of comes back like riding a bike.
Obviously, you know the route in advance. Obviously, the weather and stuff changes like that. But how does one plan for this event? Like, obviously, this probably starts planning, as far as the participants, weeks in advance to, figure out accommodations and what are we going to pack for, weights and balance, things like that. So
the Air Race Classic provides a lot of guidance, as far as the route goes. Exactly what the route is, exactly what the flyby path is. So what I did last year to prepare was I printed all the documents that Air Race Classic sent out. I printed all of the flyby diagrams and instructions, and I put them all in binders for each of us, so that we each, when it was our leg to fly, we had a copy of the flyby at the airport. We had all the necessary things that we needed to do the flyby at the airport. So what we did, each night we'd sit down and look at the legs that we probably would accomplish that next day, and go over the map and find the obstacles along the way and how we were going to avoid them, or find airspace and how we were going to deal with that, and just make plans together so we knew what we were going to do, so we had a plan and we could stick to it. And I had 20 pounds that I could pack, and that's all we could take with us. So now I'm thinking ahead of time, what am I going to take? What do I leave behind? And I think pretty much everybody, because you're there for it's almost 2 weeks, but you're only racing 4 days. And the 4 days that you're racing, you want to be lightweight. Yeah. So most people will take a suitcase and ship it to the terminus.
Okay.
I start planning the year prior to the race that I'm flying, but the first 6 months of that year that I'm spending is purely trying to find funds, trying to find an airplane, and trying to find a partner.
Okay.
For the actual race, I start planning in more detail in December of the following year. So 2024, June 2024 is this year's race. So in December 2023, that's when I started actually preparing for this specific race. The rules come out in December. So you start by reviewing the rules, getting familiar with what are the expectations for this year's race. What are the limits of the restrictions that you've got, or, vice versa. I'll start looking at the route. Like Cheryl said, you kind of have to break it down into chunks. My race partner and I have two different ways of reviewing the route, if you will. So we each do our own, and then we come together collaboratively, and we'll have a team discussion of the route of the legs, and make sure we're all on the same page of what our expectations are for that given route, and what our courses of action might be for any given scenario that we think of that we might encounter, whether it's airspace, terrain, obstacles, weather, things like that. I love to use ForeFlight, so I use the ForeFlight 3D profile a lot for my route planning. I find that's it's a great additional resource. Not everybody's a ForeFlight person. My race partner uses Garmin Pilot, so she has a different way to review than I do. Like Cheryl said, the night before each day, as you go into it, you're sitting down together, you're coming up with a game plan for the day with a goal in mind. Am I going to get to 2 airports? Am I doing 1 airport? Are we doing 4? So there's the before you even show up planning, there's the 6 months prior registration, things like that. And then there's the actual, I'm in the heat of the moment type planning. For the clothes, we wear matching outfits. So we start planning in December. So there's some fun little things there. So, but like Cheryl said too, we limit ourselves on how much we carry during the race. And so I was one of those that, I was connecting from work going to work. So I had my work suitcase and I had to ship it to the terminus because I could only bring, I forget what our limit was, but you don't bring very much because you don't want that extra weight.
Yeah.
So aircraft run at different speeds. Cheryl flew Cardinal last year. You flew 182. What are the rules on that? And how is the air race structured around that?
So each plane does a handicap flight prior to the race where we establish the true airspeed of the airplane. That's your handicap, and the whole goal is to beat your handicap. You're flying that handicap at full throttle like you would be with the race. And so the only way that you can beat your handicap is with tailwinds or less headwind than somebody else compared to their handicap.
It's really whoever beats their handicap the best wins. It's not who gets to the end first. It's who beats their handicap the best. In the handicap flight, the flight that Cheryl described, you're all doing it at the same density altitude as well. So we're going to the effort as an organization to try to keep it so even and on an even playing field. So they go into a lot of effort to make this handicap speed that you fly during your handicap flight.
So with that handicap, are there certain time penalties or things like that for certain things you do? Maybe how you cross a checkpoint, or is there a certain way that has to be flown?
You have the path of the flyby, which you're supposed to stay right over, but it's invisible except on paper. And so you know where it is. It's either the left side or the right side of the runway. You start the way we did it, we started out like maybe 2 miles outside of the traffic pattern at pattern altitude, and then we descended like really, really fast, and then you fly the timing line at full throttle really, really fast. There's a way to turn out. You either turn out left or right, depending on, what it's described. And so you can get a penalty by being off the line, out of what they call out of the box, or you can get a penalty by, turning the wrong way. Or if you don't have your landing light on, you have to have your landing light on. And you're supposed to fly it at, it's 200 to 400 feet above the ground. And so if you're higher or lower than that, you can get a penalty for that. Can get a penalty for not making the radio calls that you're supposed to make. You're supposed to make a 10-mile call, a 5-mile call, and a approach to flyby call. You miss any of those, that's a penalty. So there's all kinds of ways that you can get penalties.
Usually the penalties stem from, so the things that Cheryl was describing about the flyby are described in our FAA waiver. So there are certain FARs, this is a loose understanding that I have, don't quote me on it, loose understanding. There are certain FARs that we have, quote unquote, waived, as long as we fit within these exact parameters. And usually where the penalties come from is if you go outside of those parameters, because it no longer means that you are meeting the FAA waiver. So the penalties are usually stem from some level of a safety aspect. So like as silly as it sounds, like, oh, I was just slightly wide. It's like, yeah, but you were outside of, this FAA waiver that we have to follow.
What if you, encounter thunderstorms or things like that, or you have an issue, like you blow a tire or something? How does that factor in?
So if there is a mechanical issue, the stops usually have mechanics there that can deal with it. And we had a couple planes that had mechanicals last year, and really I was pretty surprised at how fast those got fixed and the racers were back on their way. Yeah, we have the means that the Air Race has kind of set that up so that there are means to fix mechanicals along the way. As far as weather goes, you have to read the weather and decide whether you can, carry on. We all sat in Hastings, Nebraska for most of a day because there was a line of thunderstorms that was advancing towards the route that was, as we were going to be going south. And so we just had to sit until that line kind of dissipated and allowed us to take off and go to the next stop.
There's a lot of like tactical and strategical weather planning that you have to consider. So you've got obviously the weather stuff that you've got en route dealing with that. But like from a strategical side, when you're on the ground, that instance that Cheryl's describing when we were in Nebraska, I mean, it just kept growing just straight along our route. You're just sitting here and you're like, okay, you got to the point in the day where you're like, am I even going to make it to the end of the race? Because I only have so many days left, and you're watching the weather down line. So, you're trying to be strategical, not only to get the tailwind, but just to finish. Even that can be a challenge sometimes. And even with mechanicals, last year, I want to say we had every single racer that started finished. And that doesn't normally happen, whether it's due to, usually it's a mechanical issue somebody may deal with and they can't finish because they can't get, something serviced. There are a couple like guidelines you have to follow. The biggest thing on like from an air race perspective is like, you just have to communicate. Like as long as racers communicate with the people that are in charge, like that are managing us, if you will, we call them race central. As long as you're communicating, somebody will help you. It's not a free for all. It's not on your own. You've got somebody watching your back. So they will help you try to get the mechanical figured out.
It's really cool. It sounds like there's a lot of camaraderie there.
That's why I love it.
The question I have a follow-up to that is, so obviously they're going to want to consider, safety as well as far as weather, things like that. So how is weather factored in there then if you've got half of the participants sitting at one airport for the better part of a day?
So that's a great question. There's I think it's the 60% rule. If 60% of the racers will not make it to the terminus, the last airport, they will cancel legs of the route and allow you to fly IFR or whatever means that they describe to you to get to a different airport to then kind of restart the race from there away from the weather. In 2018, we canceled, I want to say 6 of the 9 legs because of weather. Wow. So we were told to fly IFR, and we made our way all the way from, I think, Nebraska to New York and picked up
the race route in New York, and then flew the last 2 legs from New York up through Maine. So they are watching it just as closely as we are as racers. So they don't want people to be stupid and put getting to the terminus ahead of safety. So they're always making sure that we're not, we're not screwing ourselves over by not being able to make it to the end. And then we have this existential crisis of what am I doing, kind of thing.
Because I assume you're not going to encourage the get there-itis of, we got to go because it's a race and the weather sucks, but we're going to give it a shot. So...
Well, no, and actually, there's actually an award if you come in as the slowest. Let's use slowest airplane. Last, bottom of the list. If there's 50 airplanes, if you're number 50, you actually get an award for that. So you end up with it's called the Turtle Award. And I've always been told it's like you haven't really been a racer if you haven't gotten the Turtle Award. I haven't gotten the Turtle Award yet, so I'm working on it.
Yeah. So could you give almost like a day in the life or, a snapshot of the race itself? Like what it was your experience and, Emmy, what were your experiences like kind of as a whole during the race? Like what was that like for you?
Having a few races under my belt, every race I go into, it's like a family reunion, kind of like Oshkosh, but it's like all my girlfriends. There are ladies that I have, I've known since I was in college, since I was 19. And they're like my mentors now. They're like my mama birds. So for me, it's kind of coming back to see them again. As a more experienced racer, to be able to help first-time racers and first-time teams is really rewarding. You can only read so much to really make it click. So to help teams, get fostered into the program, to the event, and just meeting all kinds of incredible women. I mean, I've met, fighter pilots, Pulitzer Prize winners, inventors. I mean, and they're just here to fly airplanes. We're just pilots. We're just here to fly airplanes. And it's really cool. You would think that there would be a lot of we're going head to head. We're not going to help you out. I find that the more I race, the less of there that is. You hear it on an air-to-air frequency that we all share so that we can talk amongst each other, so that it's usually just for awareness of where each other is along the route. But you'll hear teams use it to be like, hey, how's the turbulence ahead? Hey, I see a cell that's this distance from this VOR. What does it look like for you guys up there, team whatever? Or it could be something like, hey, we passed you. We're off your right wing a couple miles. We got a really cool picture. When we get to the whatever airport, I'll text it to you. So it's there's even a little bit of that. So it has transitioned maybe from what people may assume as a super competitive and aggressive race into a literally just continuing the legacy that we're just really happy to be here and just to be doing it. And it's really cool to witness it over the years and watch more and more first-time racers come in and consume, that type of camaraderie that we really have.
I was flying with a very experienced racer, and she tends to actually choose first-timers quite often, and I think it's her way of mentoring them so that we get more people involved in the race. I didn't want to disappoint her. So I was really trying to be all about doing things the way she would want them to be done and not making mistakes. We got along great. The race was really fun. At each stop, it was kind of a relief to just get down on the ground and see the communities that came together at each stop, to see the people that were actual crowds that were, watching and cheering us on. And, each stop tries to be the best stop. So they'd have treats for us, or they would have, and then other places, they just would ask you questions. They would have the air race program out and have us sign it. We were big celebrities.
Oh, that's cool.
Oh, it was kind of cool. And or they would have a poster of the Air Race logo, and then we were supposed to sign that too. And so it was really fun.
Throughout the course of the race, what is the most challenging part for you last year?
I think the most challenging part of last year's race really was the weather for me. as Cheryl described earlier, we were watching this squall line just build, and build. And this was only 2 or 3 legs in. And then we had to sit and wait. But then a day and a half later, there was forecasted fog, like low level, low IFR fog for most of Florida and most of Alabama. So you're sitting here and you're just going, you're really nailing down like the hours that you have to try to get this figured out, right? And you're also trying to balance the like, well, if you watch somebody else take off, you're like, oh, should I be going? Should I also be taking off? So you're also balancing trusting your gut, your instincts, your intuition, and your knowledge against witnessing somebody else and going and doing something. And it's a very interesting balance. And that for me was even a challenge, just because you really want to do really well and you just assume everybody else is doing better than you. So you're like, I guess we have to go. And then you have to stop and pause yourself and be like, no, am I okay? Are we okay with going? What's our rationale? Okay, let's go. So the weather, and then just trying to not be influenced too much by other teams' strategies and performance were probably my 2 biggest challenges.
One of my biggest fears at the beginning of the race was the Mankato stop, because I know that Mankato has a very, very active flight school, and it's an extremely busy airport. And so ahead of time, I was really anxious about that stop. And that actually ended up going pretty well. It was pretty smooth, actually. And so I think a lot of the fears that I went into the race with were, not as bad as I thought they were going to be. I think it really stretched my experience level, and it was really good for me personally to challenge myself to go farther than I usually go, to experience weather across the country, and just not be afraid.
On the flip side of that, what was the most rewarding part?
Finishing.
You both have the same answer.
Finishing.
It was like you got to the end and you couldn't believe that you actually did it. And there we were. And then when the last plane came in and they finished too, and they ended up, it was the Luscombe that was the last plane in, and like everybody cheered because they were the slowest one, but they did it, and they actually placed 10th, didn't they, Emmy?
Yep, they placed 10th. Wow.
The camaraderie and the feel goodness that everybody had a safe race, everybody finished, and there we all were celebrating.
That's cool.
That's so awesome. I suppose this can still be a question for both of you. What is in store for this year?
Well, I am not racing, but I am going to be involved in the race. The race comes through Minnesota again, and Owatonna, Minnesota is one of the stops. And so I'm actually going to be the timing chair there. And one of my other friends is going to be the stop chair. So we're going to be there most of the week. And so we'll be involved, at a pretty good level. So it'll be fun.
And I'm racing this year. I'm a Classic Racer 19. We're going to go for it again and just have even more fun than we did last year.
So if someone's interested in participating either as a racer or in helping at any of these stop points or flyover points, how can they get involved in the Air Race Classic?
Yeah, sure. So there's so many different ways to get involved in the Air Race Classic as an organization and as a racer. So as a racer, of course, that being kind of the most prominent thing people know us for. If you go to airraceclassic.org, you can register for this year's race. Registration closes March 31st. You will help you find a teammate. It will help you find an airplane. The Air Race Classic wants as many racers and as many teams as we can get we can have up to 55 airplanes. And I think we have about 35 airplanes right now. Okay. So we still have a whole lot more room for people to come in and join. So registering is the first and easiest way. The second way is what Cheryl described as being a volunteer at one of the stops for the race route for that year. So you can see where the race route is going. And if you are interested in helping out at a specific airport, you can also talk to us at the Air Race Classic. You can email the volunteers team, which at volunteers@airraceclassic.org. And they will connect you
the airport people, or you can just go straight to the airport and ask if you can help. They're always looking for people to help out at stops. We always need people behind the scenes helping and volunteering. There's a lot of effort that goes into making this happen every year, and it's all done remotely. We are all located all over the world, and having people help behind the scenes to, you name it. I mean, create the programs, create the routes, manage the airplanes, manage the racers. There's a lot that goes into it. So helping behind the scenes is another fantastic way. That's kind of an all year thing that you can help out with if that kind of suits your interests and your needs. And again, the Air Race website, that's the best place to go and figure that out. We're also on social media. So we're at Air Race Classic Inc. on Instagram, and then Air Race Classic, of course, on Facebook. And we will take anybody that's interested that wants to help out. Just, we want to keep this going, and we can't do it without people racing and without people volunteering.
All right, Maddie, you know what time it is?
I know what time it is.
All righty. Take it away.
The best time of the whole show.
It really is.
Ladies. Emmy, I'll ask you first, and then Cheryl. What is your aviation unpopular opinion? Spicy takes welcome.
Oh, so I've got two that stand out to me. I think maybe it's not necessarily unpopular, but maybe it's a little bit more unspoken. But I think human factors is a seriously underrated and undertaught part of aviation. I think that there's a lot left for the pilots and mechanics and everybody involved in aviation to learn about human factors. And I think that the more pilots that get involved in human factors just furthers the research and the growth and the knowledge and understanding and how it applies to our jobs and to our livelihood that can only make us safer. I think people assume human factors is trying to take the pilot out of the airplane, and I disagree.
Interesting.
I like it. Do you have a second one?
I guess my second one, yeah, because I did say that. My second one is that's where my brain went. My second hot take on or unpopular opinion, I would have to agree with Jim's, as he said in the past, is the handling of medicals and mental health understanding by the FAA. I think there's a lot left to be desired. There's a lot that needs to be further studied and examined to keep us safe and keep us flying.
You won't hear an argument from me.
No, that's popular around here. Cheryl, what's your unpopular opinion?
That Jim is a good pilot.
Yeah.
Wow.
Nobody else thinks that, so.
Right. My unpopular opinion is the old school way of learning, like flight planning versus just the new technology. I think there has to be, I think a lot of times the glass cockpits and all of the technology that we have, it's wonderful. I mean, it has really improved aviation a lot, but I think a lot of times pilots are not learning the basics of what is this technology telling me? Why am I having to fly this line versus, some other line? And not understanding, what the wind is doing, or not understanding just basic stick and rudder stuff, and relying too much on the automation and not really learning how to fly the airplane. That is a very unpopular opinion, probably, because, from an instructor point of view, I make my students draw a line on a paper map or on ForeFlight, but they have to actually figure out what is the wind doing to me and why am I correcting for the wind. I love ForeFlight and I use technology, but I really believe that you have to understand the basics behind it.
I can confirm you do teach like that.
Well, that concludes our unpopular opinion section.
Well, thank you both so much for coming on, talking about your experience with the Air Race Classic. It has been very insightful, and I hope that people will take an opportunity to listen to this and go get themselves signed up to go fly.
Thank you for inviting us.
Happy Monday. Yeah, let's go race.
Well, thank you, ladies, for coming on this episode of the Flying Midwest podcast to share with us all about the Air Race Classic. If you are interested in that event or you've caught the spark to want to check it out, you can go to their website, which we'll have down in the show notes. Their website is airraceclassic.org, all one word. And their registration deadline is coming up quickly. So if you got an itch to jump into this, it does take quite a bit of planning. So get on the website, get registered, or just check them out and maybe stop at one of their events this year.
Or you can volunteer. They need volunteers. Don't forget that. Every pair of hands helps.
I really enjoyed learning about the way things are handled and the process that goes into planning and executing everything. So next week's episode, I'm super excited about. As some of you might know, Air Force One recently visited Milwaukee.
True.
And I got an exclusive interview with one of the pilots. His name is Charlie Bennett, and he is from Bellevue, Nebraska. And he talks about his time growing up, learning how to fly in the farmlands of Nebraska, and the skills that he's still able to use today in some of the evasive maneuvers he needs to know how to fly in Air Force One 747. So stay tuned for that.
Wow, what a banger.
I'm super excited for that. Yeah.
Like, follow, comment, subscribe, all the good stuff. If you like what we do here.
You can reach out to us on any of our social medias, or you can email us at flyingmidwestpodcast@gmail.com. Especially if you are interested in being a guest on a future episode, we're always looking for new people to bring on and tell your stories and adventures to our audience.
We'd also like to remind you that we do have a Discord server where you can send an email to us and request a link, and we'll send it to you so you can join our online community talking about flying around the Midwest and some of the joys that we get with that.
Friendly reminder also that we have merch, and since it's air show season coming right around the corner, get decked out in your favorite podcast. Super cool merch.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on this episode of the Flying Midwest podcast. And until next time, see ya.
See ya.
See ya.
Flight Chef 536, contact Minneapolis Center 132.35 today.
Thanks so much for joining us on the Flying Midwest podcast. Until next time, podcast service terminated, squawk VFR, frequency change approved. Good day.
My God, Badger, this is so loud.
That coffee's really hot. Almost as hot as this Badger Pilot sticker on my coffee mug.
You're so lame.
Hashtag not sponsored. Hashtag visual only or audio only podcast. No, I
Actually,
hashtag so many bloopers.
I'm reading this article and I'm reading everything as KDOT, and because it starts with Kilo, I'm assuming the identifier is
Kansas Department.
Yeah, it's Kansas Department of Transportation. So I'm looking at this like, oh, interesting. This one airport is doing this for the whole state.
But you're back to redeem yourself. No. No.
Oh, that's mean.
Well, there's no limit to what a man can accomplish as long as he doesn't mind who takes the credit.
That was way too philosophical.
Like fortune cookie sitting in front of you that says that, or
it was either Abraham Lincoln or whatever, some sort of Michael Scott. Yeah.
Any other thoughts?
No thoughts. Head empty.
In Indianapolis, Indiana.
I think I spelled it wrong because I got one of the 7 princes of hell.
Is this something that looks at China? It might still be accurate. Wait till you see it.
I was like, maybe not too far off.
No. Oh God, I can't talk anymore. Is that enough events, or should we throw in some frickin' breakfast in here too?
It depends. Do they have Eggs Benedict?
No.